Hello everybody and welcome to another oil painting exercise. We've got some Rose Knights here. These are from Song of Ice and Fire. This is part of the Baratheon faction, and we've done a couple of other videos that focus on painting yellow. I think this one could be very interesting because first of all we got more of a fantasy figure as opposed to the Imperial Fist Marine that we just did. But what I wanted to show you here, again, this is something we did in our basing session. But check this out. This is another unit of Rose Knights here in a very different type of a color scheme. I got some pictures of those to show you. I thought this could be interesting for you to see. Well, not just painting yellow, but essentially taking the same unit, painting a whole different color scheme. I've got a couple of miniatures here. I thought we'd play with both of those at once. Now, the interesting thing is all these units I'm going to show you, the metallic colors are pretty much the same from one unit to the next. The only real difference is what's reflecting on them. So here, let's go to, I think these are the Kingsmen. Yeah, these are the Kingsmen right here. Yeah, they also had some yellow coats. We did do a painting video on one of these guys. And here is another view of the Rose Knights, and just trying to show you how the metals are pretty much the same between the two. We used the Egyptian Violet, Black Spinel, and the Indigo, mixed those together. That was a key part of our pre-glaze, but here you can see we had this sort of a very light green, some ivory colors in there. But what we're going to do is shift that back to this yellow right here. And I've got the same two figures. Here's the other one. And we're going to make some real good use of that Indian yellow for sure. We're also going to be utilizing our craft brushes in various forms. We got our couple little filbert brushes right here, and of course your generic number 8 round craft brush over here. We're also going to be utilizing our makeup sponges once we get that pre-glaze on there. And that's one of these guys right here. And I've chopped these up into pieces for a couple of reasons. First of all, as you'll see when we do this, it's a little bit less messy this way. But when you've got all of these areas here to get into, when you have smaller pieces of sponge like this, it's a whole lot easier to get down into some of these little spots. There is especially here, I want to show you how to reflect some of the yellow onto the armor. And with all of these filigree shapes right here, it can be a little bit tricky, I have to say, especially with the oils that we're doing wet into wet. If we're doing this in army painting series and it was going to dry between episodes, different story. But these, we're going to be painting these all in one session here, all wet into wet. Basically the same way these two are painted. So I'm going to have these two on hand. We'll reference these two as often as we can. Out on the palette here, we have pretty much the usual. There's our white, our brilliant yellow pale. This is the cadmium yellow deep, Terra Rosa here, Fanchon red here. Same three over here, indigo, black spinel, Van Dyke brown. This is our Indian yellow over here. That's going to really form the basis of our pre-glaze. We have a little bit of this perline black over here, just kind of to combine with the Egyptian violets over here. Sometimes that makes an interesting gray. And then just a touch of asphaltum here. These two are what we're going to be using to shade our Indian yellow just a little bit darker. Now the Indian yellow, boy, that is just such a different color. Where's that Imperial Fist? This is another one of our videos that we did, and the concept's going to be the same. Here we had a lot of smooth shapes, right? More mechanical, super organic shapes right here, just kind of going all over the place. But yet we also have to balance that with that purple, bluish, gray color. And what we're going to do next is our initial pre-glaze. And unlike some of the more recent miniatures where it was more earth tone, we're going to have to do some really specific areas of pre-glaze right here. So we got our colors out on the palette. We got brushes ready. Have a couple of miniatures. So what we're going to do is get to that pre-glaze next, and we're going to see what happens. Since we need ourselves a more targeted pre-glaze, we are going to be utilizing some smaller brushes too. And these three colors right here, I will put a link actually in the description to that previous episode that we did. Let's get some of this indigo out here. I'm just going to throw a little bit of my thinner into that. If you remember in that video of the 3 colors, mostly indigo, kind of mid-range the black spinel, and then just a little bit of the Egyptian violet, because Egyptian violet's so darn strong, it'll absolutely overpower things. And I'm just going to try it here very quickly. Yeah, even there I can see an awful lot of the Egyptian violet in that. Also, too, I don't want to make this, see, even there, I almost made that a little bit too liquid. It should be actually more paint, because this is not an absorbent surface, right? It's just that kind of board game style plastic. And we're gonna hit all of the armor areas with that. And I guess the shield too. No, I want the shield to be, well, what the heck? Let's just hit the shield here real quick. We can wipe some of this away. Well, we're gonna be wiping a decent portion of it away. Another thing to consider, because we've got, well, essentially 3 staining colors here. You got indigo, you got that black spinel, and while the Egyptian violet most definitely is a staining color, no doubt about that. It's one of the reasons why, well, it is the main reason why of all 3 of those we have the least amount of Egyptian violet in this mix, because it would just pretty much overwhelm everything else. That's going to be indigo, and maybe even a little Prussian blue. I knew there was a color I was forgetting to put on the palette, and we'll throw that out here just a sec when we need it. It's all good, because I want to let this glaze sit on it for just a couple of minutes. Timing is everything, and with the oil, sometimes waiting instead of just kind of charging right in, not a bad option. There's another reason why I need the smaller brush here, is because, well, just to get into some of these areas, not so easy. On the back of the shield here, mostly asphaltum for the pre-glaze there, but what I want to do is get this down, wipe some of this away, and then we'll go in with the asphaltum and other colors. So let's get our next one here. And the other thing too, when you have more of the liquid on the brush, you tend to more spatter a bit more when you're doing that pre-glaze. I say this all the time. You probably don't want any painted miniatures in the vicinity. Yeah, anything you might not want a few little spatters on, maybe keep those out of the blast zone. The more controlled you get with this, maybe a little bit less of the spatter. So that's why here, this is not the most, while there's a lot of different areas here, it's not exactly a rough surface, so we won't have as much of the spatter. Let's get this piece of armor over here. What about his helmet? Yeah, we need to still get the rest of this. But that helmet right there, we're going to have to make sure some of that yellow is reflected, and that's why I wanted to have those 2 painted miniatures to show as an example. I think the other one, or that other color scheme there, was a bit less of the reflections, because anything that was pointed towards the armor was essentially just either an ivory color or very light, more of a greenish gray than anything else, not like the yellow, which is going to have a huge influence. And even this, I mean, I'm putting my pre-glaze right here, but that's mostly going to end up as yellow. Let's do the rest of this guy here. And I think that, nope. Yeah, it was the arm over here. All right. And we'll call that good. Break out these makeup sponges. And let's have at it. Let's start to remove some of this. Look how much stays behind. That's your Egyptian violet, that's your indigo, and some of the black spinel all at work here. So some of this, it's going to be a not terribly new for folks who've seen the other Baratheon videos and such. It won't be some new earth-shattering thing, but I'm thinking reinforcement, just to show that, especially here when you want to maybe paint another unit in your army as maybe a different color scheme. So make the exact same figures look different, but not completely different. Again, the armor color is exactly the same. There is no difference between the armor color of any of these Baratheon units. The Rose Knights, the Queensmen, the Kingsmen, all of those, it's this exact same metal color, which is the same as the metal color that we used in all of the acrylic stuff too. And I think that was, what, series 12 or 14, I think it was. Okay, we're going to set these aside once more. Next up, going to take that brush and we're going to dive into stuff like our asphaltum here and a little bit of the Van Dyke brown. This will be a little bit of a drier mix right here because I can't really wipe away much of this. It would be very difficult. I might as well just let that be darker. Good enough there. Maybe even the handle of that sword. And then I'm going to just get this stuff here that's on his belt. There's a couple of pouches here. I won't necessarily worry about the scabbard just yet. But it's time to maybe think about setting up what's going to happen here with some of our darker colors in these robes in the shadow areas. And this is pretty dry right here. But look at this. That's how much paint there is on that brush. There are times, and we always bring this up when it's necessary, but there are times where I don't want to have a lot of wet color. And one thing I've learned with the Indian yellow, I don't need a whole bunch of thinner there. It's best to almost just kind of dry brush that stuff on. Okay, back to our asphaltum with that little bit of Van Dyke brown here. Now this, we can wipe away some of this because, well, we can actually get to it. And the pouches here again. So that's all the paint that's on this brush. There won't be all that much more Indian yellow on the brush either. And the idea is that this darker tone is already in place. Then we mix the the Indian yellow with it. Yeah, so a little bit of a slip right there because I keep thinking, I equate it with almost the Egyptian violet because how intensely strong that Egyptian violet is. Indian yellow, it's so light, but man, it's got some punch to it. Okay, I'm just gonna take away a little bit of that here and a little bit of that over here. Good enough. And now we're gonna have at it with that Indian yellow. And this is one of these times where we're just gonna clean off the brush with the paper towel. We're not gonna stick this in any kind of brush cleaner or whatever, because if we do that, now we've introduced a whole bunch of liquid in the brush, and guess what? No dry brushing when you got all that liquid in there. Let just a touch of that asphaltum work its way in here. And this is going to be really, really odd looking here when we put this on. Look at how uneven that is. All these crazy, nasty brush strokes. And it looks hideous. Yeah, looks pretty hideous. And it's because even when I see this, I say, woof, that does not look pretty at all. And also looks really dark, doesn't it? Just look at this going, well, that looks about 20 shades too dark right there. And I'm even in my mind, the same thing is the alarm bells are going off, but experience is telling me You better keep it at least that dark. If it's any lighter than that, once you start to add your lighter colors, you will any form of darker shading, it goes away fast. Seeing is believing, I suppose. And you will see once we start to add especially brilliant yellow pale and such to this. Wow. Yeah, it's going to be very different. Okay, let's do some more here. Even this might not even be dark enough. And like I said, disregard all of these really hideous brushstrokes here. I know it just looks absolutely abysmal. And I'm sorry for that. I really try not to take any sort of bizarre pleasure in the fact that there's people looking at this going, oh my gosh, this is just absolutely nuts. What is happening here? But as the Book of Wapple says, it's got to be messy before it can be neat. And, well, guess what? This is the messy part. However, it's also the thing that's going to let you get through figures like this a whole lot faster. Because even now, what are we? 10 minutes into this? Okay, 11 minutes into this. And we've got nearly every surface of these miniatures with some kind of paint on them. And then once we start hitting these with our lighter colors, even I say by the time we're done with our next segment, there's people that are going to say, in a pinch, you know what? If that's as much as I did on those figures, that'd be good enough. I wouldn't feel like I needed to do more. That's really more of an army painter thing where we try to say, okay, let's try and cut down the time you might have you need to spend on a unit or whatever, and we'll say, you know, here, look, at this stage, is this good enough? Would you say, for what I need, good enough for me? You could always take it further. You can always do more. You can refine things more, add more shading, whatever. You can always add more. But it would be nice to be able to get things to just a certain point and say, that's playable, especially if it's a really large army with dozens and dozens of figures. And if you could say, within 40 minutes or so, get something that's really presentable, that has some, not just shading on it, but even some reflected light and some really fun colors, instead of just the, well, gosh, I've spent 40 minutes just trying to put a plain, flat base coat on this thing. So we're trying to go beyond the base coat. That's why when we did this with the acrylics, it was always referred to as the shaded base coat, because it was like a base coat, just a whole lot more. And even if some of the darker metal mix gets on there, it's not really a big deal. It's all good. We're almost done with the Indian yellow. Then we're going to let that sit on here for a few seconds while we grab ourselves some of the Prussian blue. Prussian blue, you're sitting over here. That usually ends up in the corner right here. And what I've been doing lately, again, I used to work strictly out of the jars, but the more and more I get used to the oils, the more I realize that for me, I don't have to do that. And since I'm going to be using this brush next, I'm going to actually let a little bit of that Prussian blue get in there. Mix that up with the indigo. Poof. That sword. And this sword. And then we'll wipe away some of that Indian yellow. Grab a couple more of our smaller sponges, I think. Not all of it. Just a little bit. Look at how that's just... This is bizarre how a color this light and this translucent is this much of a staining color. Just think of it, it's like the yellow version of Egyptian violet, where it takes a lot to sort of overcome the Indian yellow. That's why we have to take some of this away, otherwise we would have to just use an incredible amount of brilliant yellow pale to mix with that to get it to be lighter. So I actually have to take some of it away. Let's do this one, like so. Okay. One more little sponge on our Indian yellow. Then we've got to hit the swords, take away some of that Prussian blue and indigo mix. And he sailed it. It just got up onto his helmet right there. Not super worried about that because maybe we need to have a little bit of the yellow reflected there. All right, good enough. I mean, even here, look at how that just sort of overwhelmed the arbor color. I find that hilarious. And you can see there's a little bit of staining that's going on there. Why? Because Prussian blue and indigo, those are some staining colors. So I'm going to take, before we head out here, what I'd like to do is get a little bit of the brown. This is one of the brushes I'm looking for here. That's the Van Dyke brown. A touch of the asphaltum. The scabbard. That's something I'm looking to do here. The scabbards. Yep. And it's basically just a dry brush on there. Not a lot more. I think I'm going to maybe get a little bit of the Indian yellow into this. And we'll grab a smaller sponge. Take some of that away. And by adding that little bit of the Indian yellow, that was basically all just Van Dyke brown. There was a slight little touch of the Indian yellow that hit it, and my goodness, it completely changed it around. That is one heck of a strong color. Now, next up, I'm going to start to add some of those lighter tones, and that's to construct some of the bluish colors that are in the metal, and then obviously some of the lighter tones, because you can see the difference here. Yep. So we have to have these side by side. So we have to start to add some of those lighter tones, more mid-tones, certainly not super duper highlights or anything like that. What we're going to do is get to those lighter tones. We're going to do those next. Let's see if we can work in some of these lighter tones here. I'm just going to get a smidge of the Prussian blue involved with this. Grab a little bit of the indigo there. And if I feel like there's just too much paint on that brush, I'll just do this. Just a paper towel, whatever, dry that out. That's more like it. I mean, quick, look how quick that is, right? And this is very much like a dry brush. And we're letting the colors that are already here mix in. Now I'm going to get a little bit more of my Prussian blue into this. Darken this out. Again, we're talking about mid-tones here. We're not talking about highlights. And with the Egyptian violet and the black spindle that's already on here, see that yellow starts to turn into our Prussian blue here. The Egyptian violet that's there, that's going to give it that darker purplish metal color. And there's nothing that says we can't come back into this with darker tones. It's like here, a little bit more of the Egyptian violet, or sorry, the Indian yellow worked its way in there. So I guess I'm just going to try and wipe maybe a little more of that away. And now it sort of loses some of that greenish touch. It's not that big a deal because, well, it is kind of surrounded by yellow. So for a little of that to reflect down there, not a big deal. I do find it interesting just how light this color appears on the miniature. It's really dark. If you're going on that value scale of 1 to 10 that we always talking about, this is maybe a 5. This is not a light color by any stretch of the imagination. Okay, and then we'll leave this and then move on to some of our yellow areas here. I mean, this is really, really dark. And as it should be, as it should be. I'll set you aside. And now let's start to work in some of our lighter yellows here in the form of brilliant yellow pale. And I don't even know if we need to put anything else in it. Oh, look. Look what happens. Look how that Indian yellow that's gotten into the brush already in just a couple of brush strokes worth. So immediately the opacity of that brilliant yellow pale. But let's see how look at this. It can be that fast. It really can. I know there might be a little bit of a learning curve as far as, well, how much liquid, how little liquid, where are you dry brushing, where are you not. There will be some learning there. But once you get that figured out, and that's mostly, well, not mostly, it's pretty much just by trying. Just trying, doing it. Look at this. And all of a sudden, bam. Look at the difference there. So what was just that kind of hideous blob of some kind of weird brownish yellow, well, look at this. It's transforming before your very eyes. Look at this. I'm not even grabbing another blending brush here. We're just having at it right here. But you notice we only do so much and we move on, right? We're not just overworking this. We do a little bit, we move on. We're also getting some fresh, brilliant yellow pale. Because otherwise we would just, well, every brush stroke there's more of the Indian yellow that gets into the brush. Let's see, what do we have here? That is clothes right there. Let's get the back of his cloak here. Start to think about the sword handle as well. These little crazy streamer things that are coming off the helmet. Now, it's not to say that later on in the process here, we won't go back in and maybe do a little bit of brushstroke management and smooth some things out. We can certainly do that later. Lighten this up too. Let's get down here. So you went from that super translucent color to something that has a whole lot more opacity to it. And you notice we didn't do any mixing on the palette, right? We're just this is just brilliant yellow pale. There is nothing else on this brush. Well, I suppose some of the Indian yellow is starting to work its way onto the brush, but aside from that, this I thought too, and I guess after doing the one Dark Sword miniature and then that Imperial Fist miniature, it really illustrates how important that pre-glaze is as far as making things go faster as opposed to, well, I'm just going to paint a little bit with the acrylics and then we'll do a little bit of an oil glaze or something. I mean, is there anything that better shows or demonstrates better this notion of just throwing that pre-glaze on there and then letting stuff like just one color here, not trying to mix colors or match colors or whatever. Because believe me, I painted probably now close to 100 of these Baratheon figures, some with oil, some with acrylics, but the yellows pretty much just looked the same. And they were all painted in different batches too. They were certainly not all painted at once. Some of them I haven't even seen for months and months and months. Pretty much just about over a year, actually. No, not using any pigment numbers for matching or anything like that. I'm just saying, well, okay, we'll let the Indian yellow do its thing, and we're just going to throw some of this brilliant yellow pale over the top. That's going to make it just opaque enough. And by having that little bit of yellow in there, we don't lose the Indian yellow. It keeps that little extra bit of warmth to it. If I had used white instead, would have lost some of that. Indian yellow has that kind of intense, warm yellow. Almost, I don't want to say orangey, but more towards the orange. If I had used white, it would be noticeably different. And we're just gonna, let's get the shield here too, especially that top edge. I'll see if we can get to the filigree freehand stuff on the shield if there's time. Hopefully we can. I mean, there was nothing special about it. It was just a couple of curly Q patterns. That was it. You'd be amazed sometimes at how a simple thing like that can add so much. If it's a single piece and it's something for a painting contest, well, maybe you're going to want a more intricate freehand pattern on there. But if this is one of 100 miniatures, I think maybe a suggestion of freehand is more doable. And that's the case even for me. This is what I do for a living. And, well, especially on the few times I get to work on my own stuff, I do not have time to put all the stuff that I would really like to. Sometimes I just have to create the impression that there's more going on than there actually is. I'm going to continue with our brilliant yellow pale here on the front of that cloak on top of the shield over here. A few areas here of the clothes. Maybe even start to think about reflecting a little bit of that onto his leg. I think there's that is cloth, and here too. Okay, last bit of the yellow is all up towards the top here. Constantly have to go back, get that fresh, brilliant yellow pale, because otherwise, once you start to see there's no effect happening, so you say, well, guess it's time to grab some more of that brilliant yellow pale, because not much is happening on the figure itself. Now there, I didn't mind that there's a lot of darker color on the end of that brush, because that's kind of a shadow area there, so I don't mind. And then here, where it's going to be lighter, I could still take the blending brush if I really felt like smoothing out brush strokes right now, but patience is best. Again, the crazy streamers off the top of the helmet. And then I'm going to go back the other way, back into some of our lighter blues. Why? Because if I do a whole bunch of lighter colors with the armor first, without doing these really light colors with the yellows, I kind of, well, pardon the pun, painted myself into a corner. And it's going to be very difficult to get out of that particular corner. And how long have we been at this here? What, 12 minutes? So there could be some folks that after what we've done here, they could say, well, in a pinch, okay, if that was roughly about 45 minutes or so to get these two figures painted, at least to that degree. Nothing finished or anything like that, at least not to my sensibilities. But people could say, yeah, that's good enough. That'll get me through. I have this army to paint and maybe a whole nother army to paint or other stuff. Yeah, this is good enough. I noticed this here. Let some of the yellow get onto that, and then I also have the shield here. Kind of forgot about that. Okay. Now let's get that later too, and a little bit over here. Hit that filigree top of the shield there. Good enough. Now what we'll do is start to lighten up on some of that Prussian blue here. And back to just our regular white. A little bit of the indigo, so it's not too much of a sky blue, but I think this will be significantly lighter than what you've seen, and it's also a lot thicker because I think we've had a lot of, yes, yeah. Sometimes, well, when you notice the paint, maybe it's not sticking very easily. That probably has a lot to do with either the paint that's on the brush is too thick or it's too thin. And sure enough, thicker paint right here is making all the difference in the world. And by thick, I don't mean straight out of the tube thick. Not like we're painting some kind of oil paint on canvas thick. Not quite that much. But look at that. And by no means would I consider this a final process here, but like I said, for some folks, if you only have an hour every 3-4 days to paint, do you have the time to spend hours on just putting a simple base coat on something with no shading whatsoever? Or something like this, where in less than an hour you could have two figures with a fair amount of shading on them, even maybe some reflected lights. I mean, full on non-metallic metal too. All of these exercises right here just designed to make your painting life a little bit easier, and hopefully you can get just more done in your painting sessions, because we all have, boy, we really do have limited time to kind of spend on the things we really wish we had more time for. Now here, I'm going to go with the thick again. Yeah, okay, at first I thought, maybe I need to go thinner, but no. Now these figures also, sometimes things get a little bit rough with these guys. There's mold lines sometimes in some unusual places. See, that's all got to be yellow right there. We'll do that later on in the process. So here, I'm going to try and make that just a smidge lighter. And we'll probably also do some darker glazes into that. Actually, that's probably the thing we'll do in our next segment, actually, is to start to reintroduce some darker colors in places. It's like you kind of start out with those darks, then you wipe some of them away, then you put those midtones in, then we sort of work back towards the darks, and then you work towards those final highlights. Because if you go straight to those final highlights, you have there's no more room for maneuver. See, even here, I have to be careful with just how much of this lighter bluish color I'm putting on, because like there's this all this yellow around it. How in the world is it not reflecting that? Always have to be thinking about that. So very little mixing. Even here on the miniature, it's still mixing more on the miniature than anything I'm mixing on the palette. Now let's get the top of this sword, both sides here. Let's get his right here on his arm. We'll also have to introduce some of the violet into the armor color to keep that consistent with everything else. Paper towel comes out, so you're not necessarily trying to clean out the brush, just get most of the paint out of that brush. Okay, so now we've gone thicker. Well, guess what? We have to thin this down. Nowhere near like a pin line wash, thin down. A little bit of the Prussian blue in there. All right. Okay, just thinning it enough, maybe even two. I want to be able to get some of these little filigree areas and some light filled in there. Let's go back to this guy over here. And we're going to really emphasize these vertical, these lines, right? These chain of highlights. Gotta get those vertical lines or parallel lines, because he's effectively wearing a cylinder. That's pretty much what he's got on his arm. There is a big old cylinder, and we need to give the impression of that as a cylinder, otherwise it's not going to be terribly convincing as a shape. All right, so before I forget, it's going to snag me some kind of a yellow right here. And hit the underside of the sword, because, well, that's going to be picking up some of that yellow from his clothes. That also needs to be yellow. Then we have to go back the other way here, because that is armor. That is not part of his clothes there, so poof. And now that I got this darker color here and this brush, that's the next thing we're going to do, is come back with a lot of the indigo, probably even indigo mixed with some of the Egyptian violet, and we're going to come back and we're going to reintroduce some darks here, so that when it comes time, then we can really get into some of those juicy highlights. But next, we're going to actually make some things darker. At this point, we're going to work in some of these darks that you see here on his helmet, and you can really see that around the armor on his leg. And that's what we're going to do here. And that's going to be mostly the indigo. That was a little too much of the Egyptian violet. Okay. And this is relatively thin here. It's not a pin line wash or anything like that. But now we have to really come back in and I think establish some strong, nice strong darks in a couple of areas here. Again, it's somewhat thinned down just to get it to flow, but not, by no means is it going to be one of those pin line washes. So here on the arm, just like we were talking about, see there's kind of a line that comes down here. But only part way, not all the way down. We're also going to need some dark on the upper end there. And then on the underside of his sword here, at least on this end of it. Same on this side. And right here on his shoulder, this is almost to create a kind of a sky earth effect. Think of that as your horizon line there. And we've got another one over here that we could potentially do on his helmet. And then on his visor here. And some of the filigree. It's thinned out just enough to get it to flow, but not so much that it just kind of goes all over the place. That's a sort of control, and we said it before, it's the kind of control that comes with practice. That's the kind of control that comes with using it more often, and because that's how I was able to do it. It was only by just continuously using the oils, maybe trying new things as well. That is what helped me reach that point where I could say, yeah, okay, this is what I need to do here. This is about how much liquid I need, those different balances. All right, here, let's get some of the darker tone on this shield here as well, where we had wiped some of that away. There's kind of a seam here. And we need to do the same on the shoulder armor here. I'm going to get the underside of this again. And that kind of light, dark, and then light again. Or maybe not as light, but you see how that shape is broken up? Well, guess what? That's probably the sword that's reflecting down onto his shoulder. You know, his helmet reflecting onto his shoulder, the shoulder reflecting onto his helmet, all that stuff. If you want to have shiny metal, I always ask the question, well, okay, so how did it get to be so shiny and yet not reflect any of the stuff that's around it? It seems a bit odd that it would not reflect any of that. And I don't care what kind of metal you're doing. If it's brass or bronze or gold, if it's shiny, it has to reflect what's around it. Now, people would prefer to hear a different answer, but that is the answer because metal is reflective and it's going to reflect whatever's around it. And in this case, a whole heaping bunch of yellow. Even this hand right here should just be reflecting this. Its hand's pointed down towards all this cloak right here. So that's pretty much what it should reflect. Why would it be reflecting anything else? Why would it be bluish gray when it's sitting right next to an extremely bright yellow? And instead of maybe thinking of this, oh my gosh, I really have to deal with all that, think of it as, well, wait a minute. Okay, that's a whole lot easier to figure out what color is supposed to go there because it's pointed at this yellow. or red or whatever the heck it's pointed at, look at that and say, oh, you know, it's actually giving me a nice, easy roadmap to follow. Instead of thinking, oh my gosh, do I really have to try and interpret and figure out what the heck the reflections should be? I guess that don't think about them being quite so scary. Look at it and say, oh yeah, actually those darn reflections are going to help me out. They're actually going to tell me what color I need to put here or there or whatever. Because I really love having stuff to reflect onto different parts of the miniature, because it means, well, I don't have to figure out anything. There's nothing to figure out because the miniature is just telling me, so, oh yeah, you put this color over here. Hey, look, put this color over there. Do we have our dark on this? No, we don't. Do we have the sword? We got the sword. Now, it can be tough when you got a figure like this with so many different surfaces pointed this way and that way. It can look a little bit kind of shiny with the oil paints. Now, of course, some colors are more prone to being shiny even when they're dry. I know, to me, that the one color that always was that alizarin crimson was one. Actually, I think even ultramarine blue can be there. Well, you don't see me use those too often, do you? And that's probably one of the reasons why, is that they just kind of had a tendency to dry a little bit shinier, and there was other colors that maybe didn't do that and did the job just as well, if not better. All right, we gotta get the darker portions here on this shield. Like so. Okay, over here. And this way. Okay, we've added awful lot of darks to the metal portion. How about we do the same with some of our yellows here on some of the robe, and yeah, let's do some of that now. And on the shield here, so I'm going to take the Van Dyke brown. Maybe I'm going to go maybe back to the asphaltum here, and even a little bit of the Terra Rosa. And now, nice little edge right there. I actually take some more of the Terra Rosa here. And we'll just darken up, get a little bit more of the shield here. Let's grab the other one, and we'll do the same thing again. Okay, so this side of the shield gets that nice, rich, dark color there. And then I have to start figuring out, okay, where else do I need some darks here? Maybe some of these areas with the... and there's... Okay, no, that's a pouch. I was thinking that's an awful lot of cloak that's sticking through the belt there. I know they're trying to do a little bit of realism right there by having that stuff kind of sticking through the belt. It can be a little bit, I don't know, I say more trouble than it's worth, but I understand why they're doing that. It just can be, with this material, I think if it was cast in something a little bit more precise than this material, it might work a little better. Because, boy, if there's any mold lines that run through that, it gets very difficult. Okay, and I'm going to take one of these brushes again, and now we're going to start to work in a little bit of our Van Dyke brown here into some of these folds. And much like it did with the Brilliant Yellow Pale, see how that starts to blend together with that Van Dyke brown? And let's get some fresh stuff here. And just like so. And maybe I do snag myself a blending brush right here until there's just a line. Well, that's no longer a line. That right there is a nice smoothly blended shape. We don't want lines, we want shapes. What I also want to do is find that brush I was just using. There it is. And you can see here, maybe I will go with a little bit of my darker color there. Same under here. Let's go back over to this guy. Let's do a similar thing. Because I think on this, I would like to have a little bit more of a darker tone there. Let's get this blending brush. And the motion is more of, it's not this, it's more of a circular, we call it a scumbling motion. So we didn't just make that darker. In some ways, we also kind of manage the brush strokes a little bit, like right there. I don't even need to add anything darker. I'm just going to manage the brush strokes. Little bit of brush stroke management. And we'll do that here. Okay, we got this yellow in here. I'll let that maybe just get onto his helmet there. Now here I almost need to go back in the other direction. I need to just make that more of a mid-tone. That was a little bit too, getting a little bit too dark right there. This one's always a little bit tricky here. Is this in shadow? How much in shadow should that be? Maybe a little bit more. Using the Van Dyke brown because it's a bit more of a neutral tone than, say, the Asphaltum. Asphaltum has a fair amount of red in it. Now, that's a Gamlin color. If you can't get Gamlin stuff, maybe overseas or whatever, you could get, say, the Winsor Newton brown matter. Or, I don't know. I think other companies, I'm sure they must make something like brown matter. That has to be too common not to have from also other companies. That to be a little bit darker there. Gonna darken down some of the areas here, and then I'm gonna do something on the shield here. Just get a little bit of that Terra Rosa with some of our Brilliant Yellow Pale, like this. It kind of gives it the impression maybe that there's some wood here. As I said, all this is up to you. You could just leave that shield as just a dark brown or whatever there. But maybe a hint, just ever so slight of a hint that there's more to it than that. Let's get a little bit of that lighter Terra Rosa color out onto the scabbard here. Yeah, this one, do the same thing. We've got this. I think there's only one pouch on this guy. Man, maybe. Nope, there's just the one pouch on this guy. And then here with the inner area of this cloak, I'm going to try and soften some of that. Where's my blending brush? Here we go. Just making sure there's no paint on that brush. And again, so the circular motion, nice and soft. No death grip on the brush. Don't want to have a death grip on that brush. Because if you do, it's going to make it really tough to get this type of blending. You'll mostly just wipe the paint off of there or just make mud out of it. None of those results that you want to see. I mean, I have two brushes in my hand right now. Why? Because we've got such a light touch on this one. Oh, yeah, let's get a little bit of light right there. All right, so the next thing that I want to try and do here is bring out a couple of the highlights, maybe not all of them, but we'll especially focus on, I think we can do the highlights on both the metal and on our cloaks here. And then we would kind of do some more of the other details, but let's jump on to some brighter highlights, and let's do that next. See if we can add some of those lighter colors into this. And we'll get more into our white over here. And we'll just pretty much let what's already here mix in with this lighter white. Now, if it doesn't stick, I have to think, okay, do I need to go with more thinner, or do I need to make it thicker? The paint doesn't stick somewhere. I'll say, well, I pretty much thinned that down. That tells me, okay, I need to go in the other direction. Also some reflected light down here. Let's see if we can get some lighter colors reflected onto his shoe here. These things, almost universally, they have kind of the armor on the shoes there. Huge mold lines run through them, and I don't want to say there's not much you can do about it. There's not much you can do about it. Okay, I think you can see we've got a light line, then that darker line, then a light line, then a line over here that's more of almost like a bit of a mid-tone. Constantly have to come back over here and get some fresh white because it's mixing the entire time here. And then we need some of those same alternating light and dark lines on the arm right here. But you say it's only down, there's no line up there. And sometimes it'll kind of intersect through a mid-tone area or even cut through maybe a dark area. That's just showing what it's reflecting off of. And I know I keep saying that all the time, but it's really important, again, to show those. Maybe it's reflecting the guy next to him or a tree or something nearby. Here, I think maybe I just need to thin this down a little bit more. I don't want to do too much with highlights along here since I would prefer to have reflections there. That's something we'll do in our next segment too, but I think now I want to start to think about, okay, where are my lightest lights on this thing? In both the metals and on the clothes. Let's get his helmet here. And I think you notice we're not only just highlighting the edge of his helmet there, we're also putting some more back in here. There's also that little bit of a violet that I want to get into this too. We'll just effectively take the Egyptian violet, mix it with some of our white. We also haven't forgotten this, where we put the indigo in there. Okay, and this, we're trying to do a little bit of sky earth along here, which means we'll put some of that, basically our lighter horizon line there. See if we can't lighten that up even more. There we go. I just needed to thin down the paint a little bit. The knuckles here, also the edge of that sword blade. Swing over here to this shoulder now. Again, have to think about what might be reflecting, the helmet, maybe even parts of the shield. Got all that filigree stuff going on too. Let's get to our other guy here. Now you can see a little bit more of his armor. He's got a bit more of a wide open stance. So we can see a bit more of the filigree stuff. Again, that top edge of that visor. And the crazy rose symbol that's on the shoulders, which gets pretty much wiped out by the mold line. I mean, it really, the mold line just goes right on through that. Again, I can only do so much with my not yellow color here, because we really should have some of the yellow reflecting onto that. So that's pretty much our next thing that's going to be putting in some of that purple and some of the mid-tone areas, the Egyptian violet, and then trying to reflect some of the yellow onto surfaces like the swords and such. You can see we're starting to get here along the shoulder there. A little bit more of a glint to that instead of just a whole bunch of dark and mid-tone. And again, along the top of the helmet here. And then try and create that little bit of sky earth that happens. Now we got some filigree over here. Once again, letting some of the Indian yellow get into that because, well, it would be reflecting there. And now the sword in his arm, I think I want to try and get to that as well here. Okay, a little bit of a reflection down here. I also have to make sure I leave just some space for that Egyptian violet to do something there. Okay, I'm going to get the bottom edge of that sword real quick. All right, and now down to I think we did some stuff here on that way. Let's get the other one here. Again, just find what lighter colors that I can here. And on his foot, I mean, I'll do what I can. That's another one of those things where we're just maybe try and give it the impression that there's something there. Okay, and now go back to our brilliant yellow pale. We'll mix that in with the white, and now let's see what we can do to get some really juicy lights here on his cloak and maybe even on the shield too. Because all the while, that Indian yellow is going to have a big effect on this. Think of it just like Egyptian violet. If this cloak were Egyptian violet, every time we try putting a lighter color on there, that Egyptian violet would try to overwhelm it every single time. And Indian yellow is pretty much in that same classification of just uber powerful color. It's the darndest thing. And of course, along the way, that Indian yellow is going to get into that brush, which means you'll have to come back and get some fresh paint to work that in. And you also notice too, we're not doing the kind of stair step thing, right? These are kind of dramatically lighter colors or whatever, and then we let those mix with the color that's already on there instead of just, well, okay, we're going to gradually go a little bit lighter and then a little bit lighter. Nope, we're going strong to the hoop. We're not taking little baby steps. That's more of an acrylic thing. You don't have to do that with the oils. First of all, it takes a whole bunch of time, and you're not really taking advantage of something that the oils do really well. And the other thing too is you're going to get more interesting colors because it's essentially right. It's self-blending. And we'll get the lighter stuff here on the top of those little ribbons, whatever in the world those things are. Now, stuff like the scabbard and the pouches, it was fairly simple. We just took some of the uh, Terra Rosa, some of the asphaltum, and just mixed that with white and went with that as a mid-tone on those. Yeah, let's get something on the handle of that sword. And we'll do the same over on this guy here again, taking the brilliant yellow palette, some of our white to really make this lighter. Now at this point, the paint is pretty darn thin. I don't know, because I was just wondering, do I need to make that paint a little bit thinner? Or do I need to go the other way? See if I can also get some of my lighter highlights on the, I'm guessing a rose pattern on the shield. I haven't really been able to necessarily determine exactly if that's... I assume it's supposed to be rose because they're Rose Knights. Now, it makes me think more of a compass rose than anything else. You know what? I'll let these get a little bit lighter too. And this, and then a little bit more into the interior here. Maybe back there. And maybe even a little bit on things like that pouch. And I see we need to make a little bit of a change here on the sword here. That top part should be lighter. And I'm actually going to head back over to this shield because I did not get these things lighter here. Let's hit these again. This. Not sure how much lighter I really want to go on things like the cloak here. And there's nothing to say that, I might do some, light highlights again somewhere else. But what I want to do next is to get to some of the reflected yellow, that sort of Egyptian violet, especially here. And this, we want a little bit of a reflection right there. So we're going to focus in on, I think, the reflections and stuff like the scabbards and pouches and other details like that. I think that's what we want to do next. And we're just about ready to go. Okay, so with some of the lighter tones added now, what I want to get to next is, again, some of that Egyptian violet and then some of the yellow. So a lot of reflections on the metal, and then maybe things like the pouches and scabbards, and let's do that next. We're going to take some of that Egyptian violet here. We'll combine that with some of our white, and that's going to be, well, we'll try our best to make a mid-tone out of that, because the Egyptian violet, that's a pretty strong color, just like the Indian yellow is. That's why I keep getting their names mixed up, because they're just such strong colors. My goodness. And let's see if I can try to work in some little bit of a, you see that? How it's kind of reflecting the metal that's here. So there's a little bit more going on there than just a blob of light up there and then the dark over there. And now we're going to use some of this maybe even as a bit of a reflection color on this side. Maybe even let a little bit of that get its way onto the bottom of the shield here. Take our blending brush, blend some of that away on the top of the shield here. So you can see there's nothing gradual about that. At least that color application. Now it's got the yellow on that side. So straight away, see how that just lightened the top part of that shield? No fuss. Get a little bit of our, again, this is that violet color. Maybe it doesn't look like it's doing a whole bunch here, but when you see the overall thing, everything together, it really does make a big difference. It does give it that little bit of a purple tinge. And I'm really going to go strong with that. Here on the helmet. And even on the sword up there. And even down here. Where's that blending brush? Just to soften that down here, let's grab this shield here again before I forget. Blending brush to smooth that out. And all I'm doing is just tap, tap, tap. That's all it takes. Well, back to my Egyptian violet color, and like we did on the other one here, you can see how we've, instead of it just being a blob of light here and then a big old thing of dark here, we've kind of put a little more complexity into that. And same thing here, reflecting some things, reflecting exactly what, does it really matter? And there, I'll let a little bit of the Egyptian violet get into the armor color there to take that away from green, just a smidge. And even a little bit of the Egyptian violet there is a reflection on the underside of the sword. I mean, look at how much lighter that is. I might even just use this as a micro blending brush here. So again, just the suggestion of a little bit of light down here, and that's it. And I can always take this a little further in a couple of spots here, as far as making that just a bit lighter. Again, I'm going to do a little bit of the Egyptian violet on this side. Just trying to tone down some of that on the sword here. All right, we got this. I'm going to just take some of my white here, mix it with the Prussian blue. Yeah, because it just didn't want to really stick there before, and even those couple extra minutes, things are just going to stick a little bit better. Now what I'm going to do is see if I can't get some of the metal, the yellow reflected into the metal, which pretty much just means taking the Indian yellow here, we'll mix it with our lighter color. That's going to get it to be opaque. Give that some opacity. Now it's kind of on the thinner side here, but let's see what happens. And that sticks just fine. And that's the yellow of the cloak reflecting into the armor. But only just nearby, right? It doesn't make any sense for that to be reflecting where there's no yellow facing it. Which means that maybe a little bit over here. Probably some right over here. Because again, it's close proximity to the yellow. I mean, and it's just a suggestion. It's not like we're painting the armor entirely yellow. maybe sometimes I guess people worry. It's like, well, man, do I have to reflect all this yellow? It's a suggestion of it. That's all it is. I'll lighten that up just a little bit on either side there. And then on the helmet on this side, same thing's going to happen here. And just a bit there. And then over here too. Maybe that was a little bit more than I needed. Ah, that's better. Again. Here. And we was thinking about doing that over here too. Remember the reflected yellow on the armor that's on the back of his hand? Get some of our yellow reflections onto this. Oh, just a smidge over here onto the helmet. Onto the sword. And then more onto his arm, because his arm is basically raised up right over the top of all of this yellow here. And it is just a suggestion. We don't want to overdo it. I mean, he is only about an inch plus tall, so going to try and get some yellow in there because, oh look, his shoulder is facing down towards that big blob of yellow there. So this is why we didn't do a whole bunch on this area, because I knew, well, we've got to reflect the yellow here. Do I have to have the helmet there? I'm going to try and get some of that here. It's again, a wee bit of a mess in there. I'll do the best I can. While I'm here, though, before I forget, I want to separate these two things and then get a little separation there. And then we need to, on some of the sword handle here, we kind of don't have much in the way of shape. That kind of a little bit lost. I think I have to get some yellow right here on, right in there. So let's see if you can, hopefully you can see this here. Right here. And I kind of left it open for that. And there it is. And so while I'm at it here, let's see what we can do with the scabbard. And that was, we mentioned the Terra Rosa with some of the white. If it becomes too late here, it's just going to blend in with all the yellow. So we have to be careful with that. And then there's the pouch there. Let's look at this one. Because the color that we're putting on here, it's not like it's a really light color. It's just in comparison. The lighter this gets, the darker our yellow gets. It's the whole reason why there's no white primer or black primer and just work on a tiny part of the miniature. It's why we're working on the whole thing all at once, all the time. Because if you restrict yourself down to just that one little section, it's really asking for problems. And I understand why folks would like to do that, because maybe they feel like at the end of the session they can see, or the face is painted, the shield is painted, some part of the miniature is done. It might be a very tiny portion, but some portion is done, and there's a sense of accomplishment there. I mean, I don't want to call it a full sense of accomplishment, but what was really accomplished? You've almost made it now more difficult and longer to get the rest of that done, as opposed to working on just the entire miniature at once. And I hope people don't think, wait, we have to work on every single surface at the same time. Well, no, not literally painting them all at once, but I think you get what we're driving at here. I'll lighten the top edge of this just enough, not too much. Okay. And this is pretty much our flesh color that we're using here. That's the Indian yellow, or sorry, the brilliant yellow pale and the Terra Rosa. But it can be pretty handy for leather colors too. I mean, well, leather is sort of skin. I'm going to get back to my Van Dyke brown here, see if I can now inject a couple of darks onto things like, well, the scabbards here in a few spots. Like this. And these pouches, they tend to get a little bit, again, sometimes the details on those get a little bit soft. Mold lines have a tendency to be running right through those. Oh, that's, I want to separate this belt from the, I was thinking that was also belt there, but it's not. That is actually the clothes that are sticking through, which is always, again, I understand what they're trying to do there. Might have just been better off not being there. So now I'm going to try and manage a couple edges and some shapes here where maybe things got a little bit softer. And here, if maybe even a couple of what looks like some dark lines there in our wood pattern. Okay, I'm going to go back to this guy now. And we'll come in with some darks, then maybe with some lights onto the scabbard here. And yeah, these pouches, the details on those didn't survive terribly well. Ah, yeah, this is another place right here. Had to almost carve away some of that to try and snag a mold line. I know that's actually divided into two things there. It kind of gets wiped out, but also too, I'm going to get a little bit of my dark over here. Blending brush. Yeah, brush strokes, those go away. with that couple of darks onto the helmet again, and maybe this time in the form of the Van Dyke Brown. Again, thinking of it as like a horizon line, but not totally complete, right? It's broken up. Okay, I'm gonna make sure this shield is a little bit more set up. Now, one of the things in the final details, I was thinking we could try and do a little bit of the freehand. It was again a simple curly Q pattern, nothing crazy. And I thought, among other things, that's what we could do in our last bit here on these Rose Knights. Let's see if we can do a little bit of the freehand on the shield there, and whatever other little cleanup things that we have to do. And let's get to those next. So one of the things I wanted to do was get the little bit of freehand design going here. And I'm going to see if I can't maybe hold these side by side here. And this is relatively thin down. And it is a very simple, just a little bit of a curly Q design here. So it's thinned out just enough to help that paint to flow, but not so much that it's just going to, again, turn into a pin line wash. And as you can see, it's mixing in with the darker color that's there. That is fantastic because it's effectively shading the freehand without me having to go back and either glaze over it or do something like that or do extra light colors on it. It's we talked about the free blending that happens with the oil sometimes. Well, that's kind of what's going on here too. We're getting this almost like free shading here on the freehand. And if we don't like it, then it's really easy to just wipe it out too. Because, well, it's oils, right? We just take our makeup sponge or even another brush and we just wipe it away and it's gone. And we can give it another shot. Try again. And we've done several examples of freehand with the oils. There's going to be some more. Okay, the other thing I wanted to try here is a nice kind of orangey red right here on the inner part of this rose. That's just a little bit of the cadmium yellow deep mixed with the fanchon red. And that's enough there. Okay, let's get the other shield here. Just want to make sure these don't get mixed up now that they've got their now that they have their patterns down there. That's going to be a little bit more difficult to distinguish one from the next. Okay, there's a couple of these I just wanted to also get some lights on here. And let's get to that very simple set of just some curly cues. That's all it is. Just want to make sure you can see that where it is. I'm trying to keep it as still as I can. And all of this is very much wet into wet. So there you have that. And this is actually not terribly light. I know it looks light, but that's, well, it's compared to all that much darker tone next to it. Let's say you're maybe you're more comfortable painting this over just dry oil paints. Well, that's fine. You let the oils dry, you come back later, and then you get it. Now here, maybe that's just a little bit too light. Well, what we could do is wait for it to dry, do a little bit of a pin line wash or whatever over the top of it. Or I could just take another brush. Let me just make sure there's no, here, let me try and get all the paint off of there. Until we kind of cut down on the width of that line. Did the same over there. So we just sort of toned down that line. Yeah, it's going to be a little too much paint on that brush. Last little bit of the pattern down here. And again, that balance of just enough of the thinner to make things flow, but not too much. So they're just going to flow all over the place. And now I have to get into that orange over here. But that's not the only place it's going to go. I would like to see if it can maybe go in some of these other areas here that are supposed to be more of a maybe a gold, like this on the sword handle here. What that does kind of separates it from the cloak. Again, just given as there's a little bit of an orangey red, whereas the cloak is, see, even here as we get it lighter, it's, I don't want to say it's more of a greenish tone, but it's now the sword handle here has a whole lot more of the orange in it. Okay, let me just make sure. Okay, that is, yeah, let's just get the two older ones out of the way and make sure we just have these guys. So up here, that's got a little bit of the orange to it. Do the same on the other side of this sword blade. Then I'm going to have to come in, I think, with some of our really light tones on that sword. I might also lighten the edge here of the scabbard. Yeah. And then there's this thing. Oh my goodness. I don't know. I'm going to try and see what I can do with this brilliant yellow pale here. This area really got torpedoed by mold lines, so I'll do what I can with it. Of all of the Baratheons, these Rose Knights were the most difficult because of all these little things like this, that little rose on the scabbard there. I think it's one of the reasons why I also wanted to maybe try and do a video on these guys, because it was by far the most challenging. Even more challenging than the Sentinels were, and those were not easy. And I don't want to just show you things that are easy. I want to try and show you the difficult things, because if I only show you easy stuff and everything looks really easy, well, then you're going to be inclined to say, if you run into a buzzsaw like these guys here, you're going to say, well, wait a minute. Okay, why was that so difficult for me? It's not necessarily enjoyable to be displaying, how something might be difficult or challenging in a video that other people are going to watch, but hopefully it's a little more encouraging for you to know that, yeah, things can be a bit of a challenge for somebody else too. Especially even, for somebody that's been doing this a long, long, long time. All right, get my lighter colors here, and then some right here. All right, down here. Let's do this one. And we're just trying to do some, again, some final details. Might be kind of emphasizing some of the highlights. So here we're talking about some lighter colors on that freehand. Let's see if we can do a couple here. Just in a couple of spots. I actually have to thin this down a little bit more. Just didn't, nothing was actually sticking there. See that? We thinned it down and all of a sudden, voila. It starts to stick there, but I have to come back and get some more. But it was just a hint of it in a couple of areas. That's it. Now I'm going to just go back to hopefully some straight up white here. And let's see if we can find some nice sparkly highlights in a couple of spots of the armor here. Again, like a little chain of highlights that comes all the way down here. Maybe, yeah, let's get the light edge on the sword. I guess, that is armor right there. Again, the sword handle, well, do I need to say what ran through that? I don't think I do. A couple more lights on the shield here. And then I'm going to go back around to the other one. Look again for some more highlights on the metals too. Yep, I can see some areas that could use those. Right here, there's that little rivet there. Okay, this guy. There's some filigree there, and then we need to get the front edge of his visor. We need a couple of decent highlights here on the helmet. Yeah, sword doesn't have any kind of a light along the edge here. It doesn't necessarily have to be the entire edge of it, but just some of it. Just like there, just that one part. It gives a little bit of a glint to that one area. And then here, I might just try to lighten up this half more. So light to dark, and they just kind of go opposite on each other here. See if I can lighten that up a little more. Yeah. Okay. And we'll get some more lights on the sword handle now. Right there. All right, and that crazy rose pattern thing, whatever that is, we'll just lighten that up too. And let's see what we can do with the A little bit of freehand over here. Just to lighten up that one area right along the top edge. Good enough. Okay, what about these edges here? Because the light may be coming down from here. And I'm debating here how much lighter I want the. There's an awful lot of yellow piling up there, so I don't want to get, if I get that too light too fast, then it's just going to be a mass of lighter yellow. I was very tempted to throw more light in there. We're not going to do that. I want maybe more of an edge on this scabbard right here. And that's it. Because that's, even that, boy, I almost wish it wasn't quite so light, because it just makes it more and more difficult for the yellow to stand out from it. And there's the couple of lighter edges I would like to have here, and maybe a bright highlight on the sword handle. Hoof right there. And then here on his arm too. And then a couple of final lights maybe on the armor on his leg here. Just these couple of spots on the, so at the leading edge, the edge that's pointed towards you. A bit there. I guess maybe that's supposed to be a metal rivet there, whatever. Okay, so this was, again, this was not supposed to be super elaborate. I just wanted to show how you can just make some progress on figures. It's also a little exercise in painting yellow and working with our Indian yellow. But here, let's grab the one that matches him. So we're just matching a figure really quickly here. A couple of these. And as always, I do want to say thank you very much for all the support that you do with the Patreon page here. It well, keeps the lights on for sure and keeps people fed and all those good things. We need those. We need that stuff to keep on making more videos. So thanks again, everybody, and I will catch you on the next On the Workbench session.